There's dozens and dozens of cat chasing mouse cartoons in Hollywood. There's feature films about this subject. But Tom and Jerry, they captured two unique personalities with these characters. Jerry, the way he's drawn, the innocence, his shyness, his coyness, his cleverness. Tom, he's sly, he's vindictive, he wants to get revenge.
Cartoons at that time were evolving to a certain level of refined draftsmanship. There was a lot of exploring that was going on to see what would be possible.
We all heard that they were forming a new unit at MGM, a new cartoon department, and we all rushed over there and got jobs.
I learned on the job. And without undue modesty, I discovered that I had a lot of talent. I didn't have a lot of training, but I had the talent, and especially for animation.
I think what makes Tom and Jerry very special is the crew that made them, the crew that put them together, like Joe Barbera's imagination, Bill Hanna's timing, and the work of the four principal animators.
There's no story credits on Tom and Jerry cartoons. Joe Barbera really wrote them. He did them as little comic strips. And I don't mean storyboards. I mean, he did them like little comic book pages.
When you look at his drawings, his little planning sketches, it's all there. It's phenomenal. They're very, very rough and crude. And the animators basically took what he did and plussed it.
Bill Hanna was the timing guy. He was the guy who took that and translated that on sheets for the animators on what action was going to happen at what time.
Theirs was a practically perfect marriage. Joe took care of the artistic end, the story, the layout, down to the point where now you're going to shoot it and it's going to become animation. Then Bill took over, and they worked that way for years and years.
Their first animators, like Jack Zander and Pete Burness and Tony Pabian, George Gordon, all came from Hugh Harman and Rudy Ising's cartoons, which were much slower paced. The different animators had different strengths and different weaknesses. Like Kenny Muse had animated at Disney, and then he joined Hanna-Barbera, I think in 1942 or 43. They always gave him the big personality scenes, like just Jerry chewing up a piece of cheese or Tom leaning against the wall. But he could bring those simple scenes to life.
He was the speed merchant. Instead of doing 25 feet a week, he would do 35.
His main hallmark in animation is he blinks the eyes. Almost every time the character moves, he blinks the eyes, which kind of gives it a little bit of life.
In those days, they had a hearing aid, and he would turn that off, and now he was going to animate. Nobody could bother him, see. And every once in a while he'd yell, "I love to animate," in that heavy southern accent of his.
Well, Tex Avery came into MGM after having left Warner's, and he started experimenting with a different type of an approach that was different from a lot of the more naive fairy tale type cartoons that were being done in the 30s.
Tex was a pleasure to work with. He was a very funny man personally, witty. And one of the first things he did, this is enlightening, he gave us a drawing lesson. What the gist of it was that we were putting too much complication into the drawings. They were old-fashioned. We always had little marks under the arms and things like this. Get rid of them, he says. We don't need them. Just simple lines. So he simplified our drawing style.
Ray Patterson also had been at Disney, and he loved to draw the bulldog. I guess they gave him more bulldog stuff than anything, because that's what he was good at. Irv Spence just drew funny. They always gave him the funny, silly action stuff to do. You know, anything big and exaggerated, like Tom doing a big take, like in Mouse Cleaning, where he sees that he's put ink, blue ink all over the curtains, and he does a quadruple eyeball take, and his jaw hits the floor. That's Irv Spence at his best.
Irvin Spence was probably the one most responsible for the success of the cuteness of the drawing of the cat and the mouse.
Ed Barge, I think, had been Irv's assistant at one point. And Ed, coming from being an assistant animator, knew how to make every scene look like it was carved out of marble. He had a scene where Jerry brings in an old junk wagon horse, and Tom has to run in, pick up the horse, and throw him out the door. And just that feeling, you know, he's really running hard to get traction, and then that feeling of weight where he throws the horse out, that's all Ed Barge's work. He was wonderful at that. And every animator had a whole team of assistants who sometimes drew better than they did, like Tony Laguerra, who was Irv's key assistant, drew wonderfully well.
Everything devolved and was around the animator. So all the guys, and there was guys in those days, there were no women to speak of in the business except as ink and paint.
At MGM, I was hired as a painter, and later on they thought I should ink some, which I did at times, but I preferred the painting. Back in those days, girls weren't allowed upstairs, you know, painting and inking is about all you could do.
Now, it's a truism in the business that a good artist doesn't necessarily make a good animator. There's that added dimension of movement. And I have always thought that a good animator would be about 1/3 actor, 1/3 artist, 1/3 engineer, because there's enough mechanical stuff that's needed to round out this animation personality.
When you think that it's just a cat chasing mouse, it's like, well, isn't it the same? No. Obviously, when we look at these cartoons, there's big differences.
The success of that series was due to a happy collective group of talent. It wasn't all Joe, it wasn't all Hannah.
Animation is a team effort, and it's also a solitary effort. That team created kind of an indelible mark, and they made what might have been an ordinary cat and mouse kind of cartoon really special and really entertaining.